This video was recorded as a part of a live webinar series from Aberdeen Consulting. Please note that some of the features shown in this video may have changed and or have been updated since this was recorded.
We're going to go ahead and get started today. I do want to welcome you to session 2, live events using forms and Power Automate. I'm Jim Blair from Aberdeen. Joining me from Aberdeen are TJ Horner, who's producing the live event, Kyle Harritz, who's going to be moderating the questions you submit today, and James Gesbeck, who will be presenting how to use Power Automate and automate the live event registration process. We have partnered with Nancy from Successful Organizing Solutions for our event today. Nancy will be providing an overview of Microsoft Forms. Nancy is certified in both Microsoft Outlook and OneNote, and she's actually operated her own consulting and training firm for the last 20 years. She focuses on helping end users maximize their use of many of the Microsoft Office products to be more efficient and better organized. Nancy focuses on the back end, or the user side of the technology, where Aberdeen focuses on the back end of the technology. So we're glad she's willing to share her time with us today. We did look over the list of people attending. There's quite a few that already work with Aberdeen. For the others attending whom we do not work with, we just want to share a little bit about Aberdeen. We're an IT managed service provider that's been serving the greater Madison, Wisconsin region for over 16 years. We provide outsourced IT management and end user support to small and mid-sized companies. Our team supports over 4,000 end users in over 140 companies. The majority of the companies are in the Madison area, but our clients actually have offices or staff that work in 17 different states. We opted to do these events after the news broke about the need to social distance, and we wanted to help people better leverage the technology that they already own, during this kind of trying time. Today's session is part 2 of a series that we started last week. There is a little bit of housekeeping. We actually opened up the registration for this event before we actually had the automation turned on. Because of that, there were 20 people who we actually resubmitted their registration information in order to get the automation in place for them. Our focus in getting this out there was to get the content out there so people knew the event was coming up and to allow people to sign up as we worked out the kinks with the Power Automate tools. We scheduled this for 1 hour, and based on the rehearsal that we've had prior to today, this may run over a few minutes based on questions. If we do run over, we will stick around and answer your questions at the end. But I do want to preface that when we sent out the iCal invite, it only said 30 minutes, and this is an hour-long event. We do have another event tomorrow. We're bringing Nancy back for a Collaborate with OneNote session, which is on Thursday. We actually started using OneNote at Aberdeen about 7 years ago. I personally use it to basically organize most of my work. It is a very powerful app, and we're looking forward to sharing some insights with how you can make use of OneNote, especially if you haven't started using it yet. So please feel free to share this information with your colleagues and friends. We're going to talk about Microsoft Forms and then follow up with Power Automate. There will be a break in between for questions as we wrap up the Microsoft Forms overview. Please submit any questions you might have through the Q&A function at the top of the Teams live event. If there is any follow-up that we need to do with you after the event, we will need your name in order to contact you. So if there's a question that we can't answer, we may ask you for that information so we can follow up and get answers to any questions you may have. Before we get started, there's a little bit to say about this event. So this is the latest in a series of successful Office 365 and security events that we've hosted. And this goes all the way back to the Lunch and Learn events that we started last fall in November. Up until this 2-part series, all of the events should be considered introductory level content designed for pretty much any audience. Today's presentation is 200 level, and it's an intermediate topic. We are looking to offer more advanced content in the next few weeks. A few of the potential topics we may bring to you are noted here. Please let us know in the survey that we send if you are interested in any of these topics. We will be taking a break from the webinars next week, and we're going to assess what topics should be covered in future sessions. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to provide an overview of Microsoft Forms. Thank you, Nancy.
Great. Thank you, Jim, for the opportunity to talk about Microsoft Forms. So today I'm going to cover what is Microsoft Forms, how to create a form, how to collaborate with people internally on that form, and how to collect, view, and analyze the responses that you receive from forms. So what is Forms? Forms is the Microsoft app that allows you to create surveys, quizzes, and polls. Here are just a few of the business uses: to collect customer feedback, measure employee satisfaction, create onboarding checklists, improve your product or business, send a survey to your customers, organize an event. Forms can replace other online survey tools that you might be paying for, such as Qualtrics, Zoho, SurveyMonkey, or Checkbox. You've already experienced Forms when you completed the registration form for this session. You'll notice on the bottom, you may have noticed on the bottom, it says powered by Microsoft Forms. Prior to creating your form, it is helpful to do a bit of planning. We wouldn't take a vacation without a plan. I recommend not creating the form without a plan. So write out your questions and responses. If there needs to be any branching based on the responses, which I'll talk about what branching is. We use OneNote, but you could use Word or just any place you want to make sure that you capture that information. Determine where you will store the form and what email address you will send the form from. So is the form what group in SharePoint site or Teams channel is that form going to reside in? You'll need this information when you're creating the automation. Notify your collaborators and ask them to review, comment, or modify the form. If the form is stored in a shared location, SharePoint or Teams, they automatically have access to it. Determine how you will share the form to collect responses. I'll show you options shortly. And how long the form will be open to collect responses. Schedule a time for the group to review, analyze, and act on the information that was collected. Forms are created using Forms on the web app. You can also, from within Excel on the web only, not your desktop app, you'll see that you can add a new form and create a new form through Excel. And also through Microsoft Teams, when you click on New, you get the option to create a new form as well. But each of these always takes you to using the Forms web app. If you create a new form in My Forms, only you have access to the form until you would share it with others. And I'll show you sharing forms in a bit. But you can create a new form right from any of the groups that you belong to by going to Group Forms when you're on Forms on the web. In the Group Forms, you will see the recent group forms that you've either viewed or edited. As you see here, there are 2 of them. But when I click on the drop down in Recent Forms, it will actually show me all of the groups that I belong to. I select the group Microsoft Training, and it then says, okay, are you ready? Let's go ahead and create a new group form or a quiz from within, and then it'll be stored right on that Microsoft Teams SharePoint site and available to all members of the team. Now it's time to go ahead and get started creating your form. Pull out the questions and responses that you wrote down. That's why I think it's important, because you're not trying to think of what is my question and what are my responses when you're going through and filling in all the blanks. First, you will give your form a title and a description, as you can see here. These 2 elements are important to inform your audience the purpose of your survey or quiz. And we recommend also including how long will it take them to complete the form. How many of us have gone into a link that says do this survey and we didn't realize it was 30 minutes? So is it going to be 5 minutes or 10 minutes for them to create or to enter their answers? When creating an automation or flow in Power Automate, which James is going to talk about, you will need to know this form title. This is actually the form ID when you're doing your automation. Next, once you've given your form a title and a description, then you'll want to go ahead and add all of your questions. And we do that by clicking Add New. This adds a new question or a statement. Like other survey tools, based on words in your title, Microsoft shows you a few recommended templates. So you can click on those or even click over here and you have some more options. You don't have to use any of those recommendations. You can just create your own. So let's take a look at the types of questions. The first one here is choice. So a choice, you're going to ask a question and give your respondents choices to select from. Add as many choices as necessary. You can limit their responses to one choice, or you can also toggle and turn on multiple answers. Add the choices, and the choices can be listed, or if you want to have a drop down for them to choose from, you can change this to a drop down rather than all of the choices being listed right on the form. And this option is available for each question. Oh, I'm sorry. The required. You can also decide if the response to this particular question is required before moving to submitting the form. And this option, the required, is available on each question that you would add. The next option here, question type, is text. So the text, you would go ahead, here's my question, give respondents the ability to type free-form responses. By default, where they enter their answers allows for a short response, but you also have the ability for a longer response. It just changes how many characters that they can go ahead and they can use when they are responding. A third type of question is rating. Rating, you ask a question and you can use a rating scale to collect your responses. You can select how many levels, and the options are from 1 to 10 levels, and what symbol to display, stars or numbers. You can also add labels for the question to explain the rating system. So if a 1 star is not so good, then you could say, don't agree maybe. And if it's a 5 star, oh, you did awesome. Ranking is another type of question. In the question, you're explaining, and I would encourage you when you type the question, explain how the ranking works. So you're ranking, you ask your question, you give them 3 options, and you ask them to put the numbers 1, 2, and 3 in front of them, just so that they understand how that question works. A linkered question is used to gauge the attitudes or opinions of your respondents. You would add multiple statements and responses to each statement. So for example, if the statement is, how likely are you to recommend this session? The options in option 1, 2, and 3 up there might be definitely, maybe, or not at all. You can also allow respondents to upload a file. A point to note here is that this type of question can only be added to the form for internal respondents. External respondents are not able to upload files. But since Microsoft continues to upgrade the product, that may be available in the future. You can also create multiple sections within forms. And this is helpful if you have a large number of questions. It allows you to group the similar questions together by section. Branching is what adds the logic to your form. A response to a question will determine where the respondent will be taken next, to a next question, a next section, or even to the end of the form. Form settings is where you get the opportunity to select who can fill out this form, anyone with the link or only people in your organization. Also under settings, you can add a start and end time for collecting responses. And if you do this, even if you sent the link out early, if you said you can't start responding to it until the 14th of May, then they would not be able to respond to that survey. You can also put an end date on it. So if it closes out on the 16th of May and someone clicks on the link afterwards, they will not be able to respond. The settings is also where you can create a custom thank you message to display when the respondents submit the form. So as soon as they click submit, it would pop up. This is only in plain text, so you can't add any super fancy stuff here, but just letting them know a personalized, customized message from you. And decide if you want to send, and decide if you want to send respondents an email informing them that their form has been received, or if you want to get email notifications every time a response is submitted. You can edit these settings at any time when you start creating the form or just before you start collecting responses. If you'll be collecting responses from a multilingual group, Forms includes the ability to create the form in multiple languages. Once you have added additional languages, click on each language. You'll see there's a little pencil there to edit the form and translate the questions and the responses into that language. And this can be rather easy if you already have somebody on your team who speaks that language, or by translating the document you created with the questions and the responses before you go ahead and create your form. You can preview the form in each language. This drop-down is available to respondents also, allowing them to select the preferred language. In the form description or subtitle, when you begin creating this form, if you do have a multilingual group, let the respondents know that the form is available in multiple languages and guide them to that drop-down menu in their form. So let's move on to how to share and collaborate on a form. Here are a couple of best practices. Create the form in the group forms, and this automatically gives all group members immediate access. Ask colleagues to review or comment or edit the form. You can post a notification in the team channel and say, hey, the form's created, go check it out and give me your responses or feedback. Or you can copy a link to the form and send it out to everybody that you're collaborating with. You have the ability to designate up to 100 co-authors on a single form. These are individuals and groups. And a group, no matter how many people belong to the group, only counts as one co-author. Forms can be shared as a template. Copy and send the share as a template link. And recipients will be able to save a copy of the form to their My Forms. Or copy and share to collaborate link. You can choose to collaborate with users of Office 365 accounts inside or outside of your organization, or only people in your organization. Send and collect responses is also available when you click the share button. And you can choose who can respond, anyone with the link or only people in your organization. So as you notice throughout everything in Forms, you have the control of who can respond and can fill out the form. There are 4 ways to share this form link. The first one is copy the link. Then you can paste it into an email message, into a team channel, or wherever you want to put that link. The second is to create and download a QR code. This can be nice to insert on your website or printed material. Third, you can get the code to embed a link into the form onto your website. So you get the code, you copy that code, and whoever's doing your website can just go ahead and paste it into your website. Fourth is email a link. When you click on this, it actually opens up a new email message with the link to the form included in the body of the message. Then you can add your recipients to it and just go ahead and send out that email. Reviewing the responses. You can review received responses at any time by clicking on Responses. And there are 3 views available. The first one is a summary view with graphics. And this shows you how many people have responded, the average time it took them to complete the survey or the form. And if you added an end date to the form, it will show, is the form still open or is it now currently closed? The second is by individual responses. In the summary view, when you click View Results, it will open up and you can view the answers from each individual respondent. You'll see that there's arrows to the left and right of respondent 1, and you can just go ahead and click through those and scroll down and see each of the individual responses. And the third way is to view responses in Excel. In that summary view, there's a button that says Open in Excel. so you can review all your responses in an Excel spreadsheet. And Power Automate is going to use this unique ID that's included in this Excel worksheet. James will mention when he walks you through creating the automation when you're actually using that ID. Like all Microsoft 365 apps, administrators can modify configurations and security settings for the forms.
Hi, everybody. I'm James Gesbeck, and I am a member of the technical staff at Aberdeen Consulting, and I will be covering the use of Power Automate to automate some of the processes behind hosting a live event. The goal in using Power Automate is to reduce the amount of manual work required to do things such as sending users calendar invites, sending out post-event survey reminders when doing live events. We have been using Power Automate for our own live events, and you've likely encountered some of those emails that we're sending out with that automation. We will start with an introduction to Power Automate, including some of the terminology that Microsoft uses with Power Automate. We will then walk through an example of how to use Power Automate with live events. Let's start with the basics. What is Power Automate? Power Automate allows you to create workflows that integrate with the applications and services you are already using. In this case, we will be integrating with Microsoft Forms and Office 365 email. Power Automate can be used to create a variety of different flows, including manually triggered flows, automatically triggered flows, and scheduled flows. It can be used to perform actions such as sending emails, synchronizing files, getting or generating notifications, data collection, and much more. For Teams live events, we will be working with automated flows. There are several terms used in Power Automate that you may not be familiar with, so I want to review those with everybody. The first is the word flow. You will hear me say it a lot during this presentation. It is short for workflow, and it will consist of the steps necessary to automate a task. I will be explaining the creation of a flow to automatically send out event emails when someone completes a Microsoft form to register for a live event. A flow consists of a trigger and one or more actions. A trigger is what starts the flow running. This can be based on an event occurring, a scheduled time passing, or even can be triggered manually. In our scenario, the trigger we will be using is somebody completing a Microsoft form to register for a live event. A run is the term for an individual execution of a flow. For example, if a flow is triggered by an email, each time an email is received and the flow is executed, it is called a run. Each flow can have multiple runs. The next term is an event. An event is specifically what triggers an automated flow that runs based on something occurring in another application or service. For example, it can be based on an email being received, a file being uploaded, or a user submitting a Microsoft form. After the flow is triggered, the flow will perform one or more actions. Actions are anything that the flow does. For example, sending an email, posting to Twitter, or creating a file. Part of what makes Power Automate so powerful is that there's a nearly limitless number of actions that a flow can perform. Inside of a flow, there are a couple of different terms that are used to describe different types of data that can be used. The first is dynamic content. Dynamic content is data that changes between runs of a flow. For example, the responses that are submitted from a Microsoft form would be dynamic content, as they would change depending on what someone filled out in the form. The second type is expressions, which are used to change or manipulate data within the flow. For example, they can be used to perform math operations, such as adding two numbers together. They can also convert a time between different time zones. One thing we will be referencing quite often is an iCalendar file. This is the calendar invitation that gets sent out so that people can add events to their Outlook calendar. You likely received one of these after you registered for this webinar. This is important in the live event context, as it is helpful to send out iCalendar files to people who are going to be attending the live event. Here is an example of how an iCalendar file appears in an email message. Prior to creating the flow, you should be planning out what information you want to include in the emails you send out. This will include the information you want to have in the body of the message, the subject you want the email to have, and the email address you want the email to originate from. It will default to your email address. However, you can instead set up a shared mailbox in Office 365 for the emails to originate from. For example, we use events@aberdeen.com for this purpose. Along with this, you'll want to have the registration form and post-survey form created in Microsoft Forms. As Nancy mentioned earlier, you will need the title of the registration form that you create. You will also want to have the iCalendar files created ahead of time. These will need to be stored in a place that can be accessed by Power Automate. This would include places such as OneDrive or SharePoint. Our example today will be using OneDrive, as it is automatically set up and configured as part of having an Office 365 account. Creating a SharePoint or Teams document library is outside the scope of this presentation. With the flow, we start by defining the triggering event and the actions we want to achieve. The logic for this is simple. When a user completes the registration form, we want to send them 2 emails. We want to send them an email inviting them to the event. After the event concludes, we want to then send them an email inviting them to complete a survey. In our scenario, the triggering event for the flow will be a user completing a Microsoft form. And after the flow is triggered, we will have 2 actions. Both actions will be to send an email. However, we want to send 2 different emails at 2 different times. With the basic event and actions defined, we will start breaking the flow down into the individual steps we need to achieve. So once a response is submitted, we need to get the details of that response. From those response details, we can use things such as the email address that was entered into the Microsoft form. As mentioned before, Power Automate calls data like this dynamic content. We then have 2 parallel actions we want to perform. We want to send the iCalendar event invite and send a link to the post-event survey. Starting with the iCalendar invite email, we first need to get the iCalendar file itself. In our case, we will be storing the iCalendar file in OneDrive, but it could be stored anywhere that Power Automate can access, such as SharePoint or OneDrive. Then we will send an email with that iCalendar event as an attachment. The second branch will be to wait until the event concludes. Once that happens, we want to send an email with a link to the post-event survey. The website for Power Automate is flow.microsoft.com. This product was previously called Microsoft Flow, but has now been rebranded to be Power Automate. The left-hand side has the basic options. From here, you could click My Flows to view your existing flows. In this scenario, we want to start by creating a new flow for the event. So we will click on Create. When creating a flow, you can start from a blank flow or a template. You can also start with a connector, which is what we will be using. We will be starting with the Microsoft Forms connector, so we will click on that. Microsoft has a variety of pre-built workflows that can be used as a starting point. In this case, we will be building the flow ourselves, so we will just click on when a new response is submitted. The pre-built templates can be a great resource for exploring other things you can automate with Power Automate. There are options to connect with dozens of different services, both within and outside of Office 365. First, we will configure the trigger and get the form's response detail. This is the first part of the flowchart we created. The first thing we need to configure in the flow is to specify the form we want to use to trigger the flow to run. If you have multiple Microsoft forms set up, you will need to select the form that you want to trigger this flow based on its title. In this case, we just have one form called Microsoft Outlook Productivity Hacks. The list of forms gets populated automatically based on the Microsoft forms you have created. Then we will click on New Step so we can get the response details. In the Choose the Action dialog box, we will do a search for forms. The top action we find here is to get response details, which is exactly what we are looking for. This will bring in the responses on the Microsoft form into dynamic content that we can use later on during this flow. Most importantly, this will bring in information such as the person's email address into the flow. The Get Response Details action is configured with the same name of the form we are using. However, we need to populate the response with the response ID. The response ID is a dynamically generated ID number that corresponds to the individual response to a Microsoft form. Nancy mentioned where you can see this in the Excel spreadsheet previously. The trigger for this event automatically creates the response ID dynamic content for us. Therefore, we can simply select that option as we want to get the response information from the form submittal that triggered this flow. As you can see, the initial part of the flow matches up exactly with the earlier flowchart. Next, we will set up the part of the flow that will handle getting the iCalendar file and sending an email using that file as an attachment. In order to send the iCalendar file as an attachment, we first need to add a step to get the iCalendar file into the flow. As mentioned previously, we have already created the iCalendar file and have it stored in OneDrive. We will add an action and search for Get File. From here, we will select Get File Metadata. The metadata for the file includes things such as the name of the file, when it was created, last modified, and similar attributes. Once we select Get File Metadata, we will be prompted to select the file. Power Automate allows us to browse our OneDrive for Business to select the file that we created previously. Here we will select the iCalendar file. The next step is to get the actual file content. This is done similar to the previous step. Here we will search for Get File. We will then select Get File Content. And as before, we will browse OneDrive for Business and select the iCalendar file that we previously created and uploaded. Now that we have gotten the file metadata and the file content, we can configure the email message. For this action, we are just going to search for email and select Send an Email. This will bring up a lot of options that we can configure for the email itself. As you can see, it looks very similar to an Outlook email message and requires the same sort of data you would use if you were manually sending an email. In addition to specifying the basics such as the to field, the subject, and the body, We can also choose the sending address, attachments, and even the importance of the message. If you want to send the email from another email address, for example, we used events@aberdeen.com, that other email address will need to have been set up, and you will need to have been given send as permission to that email address. Configuring a shared mailbox like that is outside the scope of this presentation. The first thing we will configure is the to field of the email. This is one where we will need to use the dynamic content, as we need to get the email address that the user entered when they completed the Microsoft form. To do this, we click on Add Dynamic Content, and this will show all of the dynamic content that is available to us in the flow. As we scroll down, we see the dynamic content for all of the response details. In our example, the question we were asking to get the email address is the Your email address field. So we will select that as the dynamic content. This will populate the to field with the email address that is entered by the person who submitted the form. Now, you also see an entry for responder's email. This will only be populated if the form was private and required the users to sign into a Microsoft account prior to completing the form. Since our form allows anybody to register for a live event and submit the form without needing to sign in, this field will be blank, which is why we are not using it, and instead asking for the responder's email address in the form itself. Now that the to address is completed, we can enter in a subject for the email. We can also enter in the text we want in the body of the email message. Finally, we can enter in the link for the event. There's an icon to add a link into the body of the message. This will show up as a clickable link in the email message. The title is what you want to display in the email, while the target should be filled in with the URL for the Teams event. With the body complete, the final step in the email is to add the iCalendar invite. Like the to field, we will be using dynamic content for the attachment. The get file content and get file metadata actions we configured previously will show up in the list of dynamic content. We will use that information for the attachment name and attachment's content. Specifically, we will select the display name from get file metadata for the attachment name, and we will select file content from the get file content action for the attachment's content. After we complete those steps, we can see that it almost matches the initial logic. The only difference is it does take 2 steps to get the file metadata and content both. Unfortunately, this cannot be done as a single step in Power Automate. As mentioned previously, while this example uses OneDrive, other services such as Teams or SharePoint could be used instead. Next, we will configure the process to send an email to the completer of this registration form to complete a post-event survey after the event concludes. Sending the email will be the same as before, but the main difference is we will be configuring a delay so that the email does not send out until after the event concludes. In order to send the survey email, we will create a parallel branch. Instead of selecting Add an Action, we select Add a Parallel Branch. We will do this in between the Get Response Details and Get File Metadata steps. With parallel branches, both branches will run based on the one trigger which runs when someone submits the Microsoft form. Multiple parallel branches can be added if you would want to add other actions such as emailing out reminder emails. Since we want to send the email after the event concludes, we need to add a step to delay until after the event. In order to do this, we will select a day and time that occurs in the future, and we will delay until that day and time passes. Because Power Automate can be used in multiple countries and multiple time zones, we need to get that day and time formatted correctly. In order to do that, we will create a compose action which will handle the time zone conversion. We need to convert our local time into UTC time. For the compose action, we will be using an expression to perform that time zone conversion. The expression we will use is just called convert to UTC. This expression gets provided the day and time we want to convert and the time zone that the time is in. This will convert the day and time that we want the survey email to be sent into UTC time from being in Central Standard Time. We will do a search and find the delay until option. Once we select this option, we will use dynamic content to get the UTC time from the compose action we just configured. Anything we configure after this step will not run until that previously set day and time has passed. I would note that this day must be within 30 days of the present date. The longest a Power Automate flow can run is for 30 days. After 30 days, any actions that have not been run in the flow will be canceled. This is how we ensure the survey email gets sent out after the live event. The final step is to configure the email we want to send with the survey link. This is configured the same way as before. The only difference is we are not configuring an attachment. We will, however, need to include a link in the body of the message to the Microsoft form that we have previously set up to be the post-event survey. This again matches up very closely with the logic we initially defined. The only difference is the addition of the step to convert the time we want to send the email from Central Time to UTC time. Once all those steps are completed, this is what the flow will look like. It gets the response from Microsoft Forms and then performs two separate actions to send emails. One of those actions gets the iCalendar file from OneDrive and then sends an email using that iCalendar file as an attachment. The other action delays sending an email until a preset day and time has passed. Once we click Save, the flow will be active and will start running when a new response is submitted. This is a comparison of the flow we created to the original logic we discussed. As you can see, it matches up very closely with that diagram we made before. After the flow is created, you can view that flow under My Flows. From here, you can see the run history of the flow to see if there were any failures, such as the flow being unable to send out an email. You can also turn off the flow after the event has concluded to stop it from running. You can also edit the flow to make changes or share it with other people in your organization. If you click into a flow run, you can see the details of the email it sent, as well as the success or failure of each individual step in the flow. This is helpful for troubleshooting if something is not working the way you would expect. As you can see in these examples, you can view everything from the dynamic content in the flow to the data that it puts into the email message it sends out. The flow we created here is very basic. However, Power Automate also supports complicated logic that could be used in situations where a single survey may allow the user to select from multiple days a live event is being offered. To facilitate this, you can create various conditions that change how the flow executes. This can be added by using the conditional control. For example, if the response is this day and time that gets selected, then send the email for the live event occurring on that day and time. In this example here, if the user selected the registration date of Tuesday, April 21st, then all of the steps under the if yes will run. Otherwise, all of the steps under the if no will run. This allows you to put in different emails based on the responses that somebody submits in a Microsoft form. There are a lot more powerful and more coding or programming-like options available in Power Automate that can be used to add even more logic or different branches to a flow. We hope that this presentation has given you a brief introduction into Power Automate. You can use this slide deck to help you build out the basic automation that we showed and that we ourselves are using for our live events. Feel free to experiment and build upon this for your own uses, either with some of the conditional tools or exploring some of the pre-built Microsoft templates inside of Power Automate.
Again, here's our contact information. So Jim, who obviously kicked us off, James, who did the Automate, TJ, who was down in the Q&A, myself, and then obviously Nancy, who was doing the forums. All that information is there. If you guys need to reach out to us, feel free. Again, if you don't already, make sure to follow us on social media. So Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, we're pretty active on those. And our goal is to really just educate people. You know, we talk about security vulnerabilities. Obviously, a lot of Office 365 items are in there, and then just general industry best practices and other new tech that's coming out. We like to share all that content. So if you're looking to stay abreast of the situation, definitely check us out there on social media.